Okay, so I'm going to change out a front brake master cylinder. The customer has broken the tabs where the lever actually bolts to the master cylinder. Very common thing that happens. Sometimes it's the hose, people will split the hose. But when it comes to the master cylinder, that's what we're going to look at today. Now, there's a couple of little errors that people will often make that'll make life difficult for them bleeding afterwards. And the biggest one is they don't prepare the master cylinder by filling it up with as much fluid as possible beforehand. So I'm just going to go through it here today with you. So we're swapping out this master cylinder for this one. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is you need to make sure that if you're swapping out the master cylinder, that you have the correct fluid. Now, if it's a clutch master cylinder, it could potentially require mineral oil. So if you are running mineral oil, you will need that. Check the cap. It should be written on the cap if it is .4. It's not on every cap. Some of the caps on trials bikes are actually green. But check your manual, check the year of your bike, make sure that you know whether it is .4 or actual brake fluid or whether it's mineral oil. If you need some mineral oil, you can always shoot down to the local shopping centre. Sewing machine oil or paraffin oil will do the job. It's exactly the same stuff, it's all mineral oil. And it's cheap and easy to access, so it's no problems. The first thing that I like to do is top up the reservoir. So when I get started, I want to fill this reservoir up to make sure that it's full to start with. So I'll just undo the two screws that are on top. Now it may be a little bit different on your enduro bike or something like that, but it's not really that much different. And I'll just grab my rag. Put a rag around the bottom of it because in case I spill, because it does get messy. And me personally, I like to overfill them so they're all filled all the way to the brim. Right to the brim, so when you put them on, they actually overflow. Now, the reason that I like to get them to overflow is that when you drop the bike, and then you go to pick it up, if your bike is laying on its side and the fluid is low, the two little bypass holes inside can pick up some of the air that's inside the reservoir and allow the air to enter the actual line. So underneath that fluid at the bottom of that reservoir is two little holes that allow the fluid to go down and into the actual line itself. Now, if the bike's tilted over like that, or upside down, the fluid might be like this and the air bubble might be over those holes. And if someone pumps the lever whilst you're picking the bike up, that can introduce air into the line. So that's why I like to fill them to overfill, to overflowing. Then we put the cap on. Now, these have a diaphragm behind them. If you look around on the side here it is. It's very, very small. But there's a little hole there on a little gap, and there's a diaphragm between the cap and the reservoir fluid itself, and that diaphragm seals the fluid in, but there's an air gap in underneath the lid, and that air gap allows for expansion and contraction. So it doesn't actually, it's not a problem if it's full to the absolute brim, at least at low altitudes. There's other potential problems elsewhere in the world, but here in Australia, you have no problems filling them all the way to the brim. The next step, now that we have the reservoir full, the next step is to disconnect the hose. Now, it's perfectly fine to disconnect the hose. Nothing else in the line is broken. So nowhere else on the line is air able to get back in. And if we disconnect this, the fluid won't come out of the line. So the fluid will remain inside that line. And it may dribble out of the reservoir, but it won't dribble out of the line. So you can see that there. There's no fluid coming out of that line at all. It's practically dry because it's such a small hole that it's just like when you're a kid if you're at McDonald's, it's like you've got a thumb over the end of that hose. No fluid can come out of this end at all. So we'll get rid of that, the old broken master cylinder, and get that one out of the way. I did take the throttle off as well because I don't like brake fluid on the grips. Once you get the brake fluid on the grips, it feels like it's impossible to get it off. It just feels horrible, and I'm sure it does damage to the rubber as well. That may or may not be the case. So now that we've got the hose is full of fluid, there's no air in that. There might be a tiny little air bubble at the tip that gets trapped, but it's very, very small. Now we've got the reservoir full, but here through to the piston is not full. So we can grab our rag again. And then just put a tiny bit of fluid in this hole here, so it's all filled up. You can give it a little pump, and you see that little couple of bubbles of air just came up. Push it all the way to the top, and then we'll let that back down again, just to get the air bubbles out of that point there. There's no point introducing any more air than we need to. We'll give it another little pump, and there's no air coming out now at all. Now that is overflowing, it's full, and then I'll just tilt the hose over, pop that in, and there'll be a certain amount that'll get displaced as the thread screws in. So it'll continue to overflow a little bit as you screw that on. We'll tighten it up. Now I won't do it crazy tight, I won't do it fully torqued until it's on the bars. So just something like that, just gently nipped up so it's still movable. Then I'll mount that to the handlebars. Mount that roughly where you want it. And then I'll just back this off to allow the hose to straighten itself out. And then just nip it up so that's nice and tight. And there we have a fully fitted brake, and you can see here that we already have full pressure. There's no need to bleed or do anything silly like that. I will cover bleeding in another video in the future, in the coming weeks, because bleeding is another way that people go and add air into the line, and it ends up causing more problems than good. Sometimes though, you'll get a little bit of sponginess here. And the sponginess can be just a little bit of air trapped, a couple of little bubbles trapped inside. Now remember, there's no air down the bottom. It's only going to be very small amounts of air. And if we look in the top here, now you can see those two little holes. There's that black dot. Whoop, let's grab an Allen key to point. There is the black dot right there, and then there's that one there. Now, if we just give the bike a gentle pump, you'll see the fluid is being drawn and pumped. If you have any sponginess, you just give the lever a couple of pumps, just a few pumps. Make sure, if you're doing this, that you have glasses on, because the fluid can spit up and squirt you in the eye. Couple of pumps, and that is absolutely solid with no need to bleed whatsoever. Again, when you go to top up the reservoir, fill it to the brim. You'll want the reservoir to be sitting nice and level. This is the diaphragm that I was talking about that's on the back. Now that has an air bubble behind it, and that allows for the expansion and contraction. You can pop that lid back on. I do make a bit of a mess in this process, but there is no issues whatsoever about introducing air into the lines in any way, shape or form. Screw that down. Give it all a bit of a clean. And there we have one fully solid pressure, completely bled, refitted master cylinder. It's that easy. If you have any trouble at any point in time, give us a call. We're always there to help. So don't be shy. Give us a call and we'll help you out. No worries.